Well, hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and I know I don't usually wear my hair up, but it's really hot outside as I'm recording this. And I had an event outside this afternoon. It was like 93 degrees. It was very warm. So I was like, no, I don't need all that on my shoulders. So I put my hair up, and then when I got home, I was like, do I really want to like take it down? I don't know if any of you all get like hat hair or anything like that. If I take this down, it's just gonna like be a mess. And I was like, I'll just leave it up. And I wanted to watch something to round out the evening. And as per usual, I had other plans. But then when I sat down to watch it, I was like, I want to watch Uramichi Onisan. But the problem is, we're on the penultimate episode of the series, and next week's the last episode of season one, and that bothers me to no end because I'm like, oh, that's it? I've had people ask way back with like episode 6 and 7 being like, are you going to read the manga? And the short answer is no. I am so busy on this channel and then busy with my numerous things I do outside the channel to make actual money. So I don't really have time to get into the manga and do reactions to the manga. And I don't really want to watch the manga as much as I love this series. I'm very hesitant to watch the manga or read it rather on my own time because then if they announce a season 2, I'll already know all the jokes and that's half the fun. So the good news about my channel is that I have so many shows that have yet to be watched, so much anime yet to go through, that I have plenty to take its place. But sadly, next week will be the last episode of Uramichi Onisan, and then we'll just wait and see if they do a season 2. And if a year or so they don't, then maybe I'll go back and look at the manga. Who knows? But for right now, the answer is no. And I don't really want to know about the manga because if they do make a season, then no. And I think that there's a good chance that they might because I mean you look at the life of Psyche. He's like a psychic. I've not seen that series. I've been told I need to. It'll happen one day, I'm sure. But it's like multiple seasons, right? It's several seasons. So I feel like comedy anime has a place to have multiple seasons, and this is definitely one of them. So we'll see if it ends up happening or not. But yeah, so please no manga spoilers. Don't worry, I will eventually get to it somehow, in some way, shape, or form. But if you want if you want to see me do reactions to it, don't tell me. But yeah, it's the penultimate episode. I do have some comments I want to talk about before we dive in, though. H Banana 7 talked about Shiso back in episode 7, which gives you an idea of how far ahead I recorded. But I love this show so much. I'm talking about Shiso as being described as being an adult taste in Japan, kind of like wasabi and ginger. I'm okay with wasabi. I don't care for ginger that much. I feel like ginger's kind of eh. I'm very much a sweet tooth, so I probably have a very juvenile taste in the spectrum of Japan. But in Uramichi's dream in episode 7, he notes that the things with adult taste were the ones going missing from his life. So maybe that means Uramichi doesn't believe that he's fully like accepted adulthood, or maybe he's still missing his childhood, or there's a lot of ways you can look and interpret that, I'm sure. Seppi points out that the boyfriend of Tadano, his name translates to praise and honor and amazing or with great skills. I had really hoped we would see more of him in this show, but that may be something for season 2. I do know one thing. I do know from looking up and seeing how many volumes of Uramichi Onisan there are, and there are several, and they're still ongoing. I did learn from the mangaka that they have a spin-off series with just the boyfriend. And I'm like, oh, that could be interesting. I'm not opposed to reading that, maybe, and doing a review or reaction of it, but it'll have to come down the road. But that's interesting to me. And then Alexander Q talked about Kumatane in episode 6, saying that as he was teaching Ikateru to play ping pong, he was telling Ikateru, he's like, well, here's what you do, and you just act it out. And that kind of plays to the idea that Ikateru is great at anything as long as he believes he's an actor, which again goes back to that existential thing that all these characters are struggling with, is being themselves and accepting their identity and agency in society. Whereas Ikateru is like, well, if I can act it out, I can do it. But if I can't act it out, we saw him have a meltdown at the beginning of the series because of it. So, and I thought that was interesting that Kumatani kind of plays to that side of him. But yeah, so many good ships, so many good times. I'm honestly going to miss this show. I'm going to have to find another series that I'm watching to be like my go-to happy punch, but this one really did the trick. So I know in the August update video, We'll be talking about the series, and in the September update video as well, the series is going to be replacing this one. So if you've not watched the August update, it came out a little while ago, you can go check it out there. And then as far as the September update video, it'll be out, if it's not out already, as you all are watching this, and it'll talk about the series replacing Life Lessons with Uramichi Onisan after next week. But I'm really sad because I like this series so much, and the dub has been so fun. I love the dub as well. It's such a good time. It's actually a really good dub. Sometimes dubs can be hit or miss, but especially with comedy, because you're like, well, is the Japanese comedy going to translate? But they make it work, and it's actually really, really cute. So anyway, I'm super excited, y'all, to see what we get with this episode, but we're not gonna waste any more time. We are gonna start Life Lessons with Uramichi Onisan, episode 12, the penultimate episode, and we're gonna do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's see what they give us. How dare! I thought I was going to wait a while before I watched the finale to let me have this and let it sink in and take my time, and you make this a two-parter? How dare you, show? Well, I'm sorry for you all. I'm so sorry that you all have to wait a week, but I don't know if I'll be able to. I mean, I have a lot planned this week reaction-wise, so I don't know if I'm going to get to the season finale, but that just makes it worse. Now I have to wait a week too. Knew this was a bad idea. No, oh my gosh. There has to be a misunderstanding. I don't know if Uramichi is actually quitting. So we start this episode out, and of course Usahara's like sleepy, and then we see like the guy with the sign looks like he's like, so that's what's happening, huh? Like, he seems upset. And Uramichi's like, yeah, that's what's happening. He's like, I feel I've reached my limits. And I wondered if maybe I can't imagine that he's just quitting and he's just telling the random like guy there. I don't know if that's the case, because like, wouldn't he go to the direct? I feel like if Uramichi was actually quitting the show, he would go to the director and it'd be like this big thing, like him finally quitting, finally having enough. But we've seen the last couple episodes, he's been enjoying the time that he's been on the show, and Uramichi doesn't want to admit it, but he does kind of like the kids and like part of it. So I don't know if maybe it could be a number of things. It could be, has he's reached his limits with being able to perform the acrobatics, and so he needs to go to physical therapy, since they did touch on that this episode. That could be. Could it be he's reached his limits of being in these ridiculous outfits they put him in, so he had to tell marketing and he's in a good place about it? Is it that he's just reached his limits with a certain segment of the show and he's moving on to a different segment? I just don't believe he's quitting, because I feel like he would tell everybody or just leave. And they're like, so then you'll really, yeah, I'll quit at the end of this month. Oh, maybe he's quitting smoking. Maybe he's quitting smoking because he's realizing it's hurting his body, so he's just going to quit smoking. Maybe that's it. He's like, I'll quit at the end of this month. And then Usahara, of course, and he's like, well, I guess it can't be helped, but I'm sure you'll be able to find the best place for you. And he's like, I'm rooting for you. And he's like, well, thank you very much. And he's like, quit? What? So, surely he's talking about quitting. Maybe he's like, maybe you'll find like the best place for it. Maybe you'll find something like another habit to get. Like, maybe he's just quitting smoking. Maybe that's it. I just can't imagine him coming to work and being in a cheerful spirit and him not tell everybody else that he's leaving, right? Because they're such a tight-knit group. I just can't imagine it. So, of course, Usahara thinks the worst and goes to the bar Kit Kat. I just like that Kumatani's like, you sure you're not wrong? Like, the first thing he says. Man, Nekomata had a glow up. Our bartender had a glow up because Kumatani looks the same. Usahara, his hair's just grown out. But Nekomata, whatever his name is, like his hair like grew out and he like kind of dyed it a little darker. Like he had a glow up for sure. He's like, he looked very serious. And then poor Uzahara, he's just like, got his bottle of whiskey. He's gonna quit being a gymnast, Oni-san. I just love that as Uzahara is having this existential crisis about his crush, Kumatani is just sitting there eating bar peanuts, being like, that's real hard for you. Kumatani is like a badass. Kumatani is a badass. You know who he reminds me of? He reminds me of Fushiguro from Jujutsu Kaisen. He reminds me of Megumi, where he's like kind of soft-spoken, seems kind of quiet, he seems kind of shy, but then you find out he's a freaking delinquent and will go badass on you if you try to mess with the person he cares about. And it's like, yeah. So maybe that's why I like his character so much. Oh, Uzahara, sweetheart. I just like that, you know, I like Nekomata's like, well, I don't know. He doesn't look like someone who'd quit his job so easily. Exactly. And he kind of likes it. And he's like, don't just eat the peanuts in the kaki pea. I didn't know it was called a kaki pea. I like the Kumatani is just not sympathetic at all. And then he just goes, meh. That edit of him just going, meh. Just, it's like, that would be something Team 4-Star would do for like Dragon Ball Z Abridged. That edit was golden. So golden. I love that in the Japanese bars, and I know some American bars do it, but I see it all the time in the Japanese bars. They have like the ice cube that's the big ball of ice. And I know it's specifically something you do with whiskey. It affects the taste of it and the flavor of it. That is like on my bucket list. If I go to Japan, I have to go to Bar Lupin, where Bungo Stray Dogs was based off of. I have to go to Bar Lupin, and I have to get, even though I don't drink hardly at all anymore, I need to get like a whiskey on the rocks and just have it there and just, I need it. I need it. But, oh, poor Uzahara. And he's like, I'm going to miss him if he quits. And Kumatani's like, yeah, we've known each other for a long time. For like 10 years. They've known each other. And Uzahara like screaming out his name. And Kumatani and Nekomata are like, why are you shouting? And he's like, you guys met him and it was really fateful, wasn't it? And it's kind of the bartender, it's kind of his, you know, fault that they all met. And Kumatani is like, if it wasn't for that coincidence, we definitely would not have met. So we have congrats to the all-male gymnastics meet. First place was Uramichi Omoda, and second place was the volleyball team. Basically, Uramichi did better than the entirety of Haikyuu, so... Which is hilarious to me. That, I guess maybe Uramichi got first place in the gymnastics meet for his event, and the volleyball team got second place for their event. I guess that's what it means, which is... and honestly, Uramichi, like, he's at a college, so he basically is like, that's pretty great that he's getting recognized there. So we see him with this trainer getting ready to perform. I just want more information about him and the sport itself and all of that. I wish I knew more, but they don't give it to us at all. I feel like if they do a season 2, that's going to be waiting for that. So Uzahara is trying to go on a girl group date, and Kumatani's like, I don't want to go. And Uzahara's like, please, we're friends. Can you do me a favor? He's like, you should hang out with friends for a change instead of studying and practicing Japanese archery. And Kumatani's like, it's none of your business what I do. He's like, fine. Kumatani's like, you know, I liked Kumatani's backstory in this episode as well. But in this moment, it's like fate. He meets Ikateru. And Ikateru's like, oh, you dropped your handkerchief. And he's like, oh, here you go. And he asks him the time. He's like, but you had a watch. What a weirdo. I love that Kumatani says, what a weirdo. But then again, if you're a delinquent, tsundere-ish badass, then what a weirdo is kind of, I'm interested. That's kind of like the equivalent, right? And so then they go on the group date. And I'm like, Uzahara, dude, you shot yourself in the foot. And she's like, oh, I watch movies. Like, oh, I love movies. And it's like, dude, you don't even watch them. Rule number 1 on a group date. Rule number 1 on any date. Don't lie, because that will come back to bite you instantly. Gentlemen, don't lie. Women will see right through it. And she's like, oh, have you watched any recently that you liked? And he's like, let's see, there's just so many. And she's like, oh, that one. I liked that one. red flamingos, and one flew over the bull-headed strike's nest. Oh, instead of the cuckoo's nest. Oh, wow. So instead of them saying pink flamingos, which is by John Waters, or Stanley Kubrick's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, they said red flamingos and one flew over the bull strike's nest. And then somebody's like, are you a model by chance? You're so cute. But then the girl says, they're pretty basic, though. I'm like, basic, though? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and pink flamingos? I don't think I'd use, especially pink flamingos, I wouldn't use the term basic to describe either of those films or either of those books. What? What? I know Pink Flamingos I don't think is based off a book, but One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is, and I've read that one. It's crazy. What? I'm like, the moment a girl says that Pink Flamingos is basic, you might not be ready for her. I don't think you're ready for her. I'm like, wait, what? Usahara, he dodged a bullet, because if he'd kept going out with girl that said that Pink Flamingos was basic, he would have ended up tied up in a basement with some BDSM stuff going on, and he would have died. So I think that Kumatani might have saved his life. And he's like, oh yeah, I know them. And I like that Kumatani looks over at Usahara like, really? You say you know those movies? You don't know them. And I like that the one girl tries to talk to him and be like, oh, you really don't like this either. Like, I'm kind of not into group dates either, you know. She's like, maybe we could go somewhere alone after this. And if anybody is the consent king in this series, it is Mother Truckin' Delinquent Kumatani. He will not have you trying to do anything against anybody's wishes. Not that she was, because she probably would have been like, do you want to go off and do stuff? And he's like, no. He's like, we're on the first date. No. Like, girl. But he's like, Kumatani is not desperate, is my point being. And anybody that seems that way is not his type. Which is why him and Usahara kind of butt heads a lot as well, right? I honestly thought going through this series at the very beginning, I thought I would be shipping Usahara and Kumatani, but I'm not at all. They have such polar personalities. They're both good for Uramichi in different ways. Like, Usahara is very empathetic, and he's very wear his emotion on his sleeves kind of person. And you can tell that he really cares for Uramichi, obviously, and that he wants to help him. And Kumatani kind of wants to help, but he does so in his own way, and it's totally different from Usahara. Like, Kumatani does not express emotion. He's kind of a delinquent. He doesn't care, and he just does things his way. But he does have a compassionate side to him, especially, like, with cats and Ikateru. But Usahara being like, I want to be funny and get girls, and Kumatani's like, you just can't lie to them. He's like, everything you did backfired because you started talking about something that you know nothing about. And of course, then Usahara deflects and says, oh, did you finish the sports research homework? And he's like, yeah, it's due tomorrow. Oh, he says, what? It's due tomorrow. Like, I haven't done it yet. And he's like, well, let me see yours. This is the last favor I'll ask of you. And he's like, how many last favors are you going to ask for? He's like, well, quit sweating the small stuff. So then they go back to their apartment and they talk about how Naketo, there we go, Nakota is acting like a stranger. Nakota leaving the dorm to stay with his girlfriend. And Kumatani's like, well, I wish I could say something like that. That I could leave you here. He's like, I don't want to live alone with you. I hope someone moves in soon. I love that. So then they're like, we have a new segment. Okay. And the top 500, the Oricon rank 499, matching look of love in Naniwa by Yasuko Oiri. Damn. Like, her debuting at 499 is kind of sad. Oh. So basically, I liked that Tadano was like singing throughout this entire episode and they just didn't even know it was her. I felt so bad for her in this episode. But Usahara has had the biggest crush on Uramichi for a long time. And Kumatani has kind of suspected this. And he's kind of like, I'm just going to let you figure it out and do your own thing. And then look who shows up in their dorm. But it's Uramichi himself. And it's so weird to see like an 18-year-old Uramichi smiling and looking so happy. Like looking bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. The thing about it is, I wonder if him looking so enthusiastic and lively is one, because he's put on that mask kind of like he does for the kids show, or two, because like his gymnast career hasn't like been abruptly ended yet and that's still what he's going for, or if again he was just better at hiding the mask then than he is now, or he puts his guard down because he knows them, right? Dang. But yeah, I like that we got back to Kumatani trying to. I like that when Usahara is about to throw up, Kumatani throws his coat at him, like, here's your coat. It's not even his coat, it's Usahara's coat. And then gives him a drink of water. I'm like, man. And he does seem to kind of feel bad for him, because Usahara's like, what should I do? And he's like, I've always admired Uramichi ever since my college days. And there are times I get nervous working at the same place. But when it's all said and done, I do have fun. And Kumatani is like, yeah, despite all the craziness that we've gone through, we do kind of like this job. And he's like, Uramichi's really clumsy with everything except gymnastics. And he's not meaning to be an insult, but he's just like, Uramichi's not really great at anything except being a gymnast. And I would argue we've learned that Uramichi is good at other things. And that's why Kumatani's like, don't tell him you said that or he'll beat you up. He's like, I'm not making fun of him, but gymnastics is all he's ever had. So then we cut to the school like track and field thing, and we see where Usahara like falls and hurts himself. Classic sports anime, gotta have that knee pad, gotta have that knee brace, right? I do think that Usahara relates to Uramichi a little bit, because he kind of understands what it's like to be heavily involved in a sport. But what's interesting is whenever he like sprains his ankle, Usahara doesn't really care what ends up happening. He's like, I'll just stay off of it, but it's fine. It's kind of like he's not giving his all into the sport. Whereas when Uramichi finds out, he's like, you need to take care of this now so that it doesn't turn out to be something serious. And it's like, for Uramichi, he treats the sport a lot differently. Also, again, talk about shipping, y'all. The girl that like was wanting him to like ask Uramichi out for her, and he's like, no, he doesn't have a girl. He has a girlfriend, I'm sure of it. I was like, dude, that is the behavior of somebody that wants to ask him out yourself. So they go back to the dorm room. Again, Uramichi is still working out, as he always has done. And then this poor girl, Riko Doshibu, who's stuck out there checking for the typhoon. I feel like that's just such a direct parody to anybody out in the field that has to be forced to work out in the storm. At my local news station, my friends and I, we always joked, we felt bad for this one anchor. His name was like, I think they called him, was it Robert? It was like Robert or Bob, or it might have been Bill. I think it might have been Bill. But they always sent him, like whenever there was a storm, they'd send him out in the field. They'd be like, and now we're going to go to Bill with Eyewitness News. And he'd be like in the middle of a tornado under an overpass. And he'd be like, well, it's shit out here. And my favorite would be when it'd be like 10 feet of snow. And they're like, what's it like, Bill? And he's like, well, you've stuck me out in my car that's like -50 in the snow. It's what you think it is. Like, he always was kind of also tongue in cheek. And it was just, I remember watching the news segments. I'd text my friends and be like, are you seeing Bill on here? And they'd be like, yes. So I feel for Riko. I feel for this girl having to deal with what she is. And they're like, well, I guess we're not going outside. And so then they hear a big explosion. I love the expressions on everybody's faces. And Kumatani's like, what? I like that Uramichi and Usahara have these big expressions when that explosion happens. And Kumatani's like, He's not even affected. So then they go out. And that's as they're going out, Usahara can't go with them because of his leg. But they find out that the lucky tree falls on the dorm. The sacred tree comes down and falls on the dorm, and luckily they'd evacuated it. But yeah, them all realizing if Uramichi had been in that dorm when that tree came down, he could have been killed. They literally saved his life. It almost seems like an act of fate to put them all together so that they're with one another, right? I think that that's so interesting. And they're like, well, I guess you'll just have to stay with them until they get the repairs. And that's when I like that Uramichi's not good with names, so he keeps saying like Usa, Kuma, and they told like Tobikichi Like tell him, and he taught the moment that he grabs his ankle and like looks at his foot, I'm like, that was a shippable moment too, where he like bends down on one knee and gets his foot in his hand. Like they could have romanticized and BL'd the hell out of that, but they didn't, because that's not the point of the scene. But I was watching, I saw that, and he tells him to go to the hospital, and he's like, well, it's not a big deal. And Uramichi's like, well, aren't you scared? This could end everything for you. And Usahara's like, oh, you think gymnastics are everything. I don't think that this track and field is everything. So it just shows how differently they look at the situation. And he's like, oh, you're making a big deal out of it. He's like, well, even if I couldn't do track and field anymore, but he wasn't scolding him or trying to reason. He's like, how should I react to his pure questioning eyes like a child? Yeah, like Uramichi has this kind of like secret kind of innocence to him that seems to have been lost over the course of the years. But now I want to know what happened to Uramichi from college days to get to where he is now. Maybe we'll find out next episode. Maybe the flashback will extend. And then Kumatani making the little cat house. That part was so cute. I'm like, that's so sweet. And he looks so happy doing it. Kumatani is such a layered character. I really like him. Like we've gotten a lot with Uramichi. We've gotten a lot with Usahara. But Kumatani, surprisingly, has had a lot of layers. Like from being a delinquent to not wanting to be I love the idea that he talks about. We'll see it here in a second in the episode where he talks about not being artistic like his dad and his grandpa. Like his grandpa was a chef and his dad was his grandpa was a fisherman. His dad was a chef. And we see that Kumatani can cook like his dad. He can fish like his grandpa, but he doesn't really seem to take that much pleasure in it. He just does it and he's good at it. But then he like takes care of the cats and stuff and he really likes that. So I kind of like the idea that Kumatani, whereas Uramichi and Ikateru kind of were seemingly forced to live out their childhood by what their parents wanted, Kumatani kind of like carved his own path and decided he'd do like Tsurune and build stuff for cats, and he's kind of like made himself the way he wants, and I respect that. I think that's so cool. I love the idea that Kumatani is different from Uramichi and Usahara and Ikateru in that sense. But yeah, so Usahara gets his crutches, and then he passes by Tadano, girl, and she's singing that song from the karaoke song. I didn't realize that she sang it a certain way. I didn't realize that it was a certain style, but now she talks about being a failure at the folk style of singing as well as being an idol. So that must have been in the folk style of singing, and she didn't go anywhere with it either. Dang. And then Ikateru saves Usahara too. Ikateru's just been there in the background this whole time, right? But man. And so then Usahara with Uramichi. He's like, the words kept weighing on my mind and I kept going back to them. Yep, gymnastics may be all he's got. I thought so when I saw his awkward smile. But then when he loses gymnastics, is that when it kind of falls apart? We don't know. We've not been shown that. So he's like, we'll just casually ask Uramichi about tomorrow. And Kumatani's like, yes, you and casual, those words go together completely. He's like, why am I involved? He's like, because I'm scared. And he's like, well, how weak-hearted. He's like, gymnastics is all Uramichi-san's ever had. And Kumatani's like, well, he's like, I don't know what to think about that. He's like, that's true, but he's like, but I like the Kumatani's like, yeah, sure, he's always had gymnastics and that's been it, but that side of him also seems kind of lonely. Because then we go back to him going and getting drinks for Usahara and Nekomata. He goes and gets them drinks, and then Uramichi shows up. And he's like, they talk about him like he's a superstar, but I feel really uncomfortable around him. I feel like Kumatani is uncomfortable on Uramichi because he senses that what we see of Uramichi is not really what's underneath it, and so he's naturally like getting defensive and like preparing to like defend himself. But I kind of love this series in that not everybody that works together or are friends are all compatible. Like you have Usahara, Kumatani, and Uramichi who all get along to an extent and they all influence one another, but they don't necessarily jive, which I think is really, really cool. They're all different personalities and they kind of like mismatch, and it's a stroke of fate that they end up together. So that part's really cool. But Kumatani is like, he talks about from his childhood, I was taught laziness and lies were truly characteristics of humans. Oof. I loved his flashback here. They had this artisan spirit. My family became stricter every year, and I rebelled against it and became a delinquent. Mitsuo. I love that he just like basically like kicks these people's asses. And he's like, they're like, except Kumatani-san. He's like, shut up. He's like, youngsters have to work hard to devote themselves to something. And I hated the expectations that people had. But then my relationship with my family was worse than. So because of a casual suggestion, I joined the Japanese archery club in high school. But then his brother, yeah. I like that he had his brother beside him. And his brother reminds me a lot of Ikateru. So maybe that's why Kumatani is drawn to Ikateru, because he has this kind of innocence to him, like his own brother. Maybe. I read once somewhere that you're kind of drawn to, what did I read? It was like in a Cosmo magazine years and years ago, but it always stuck out to me. It was like saying that if you're an eldest sibling, you're drawn to younger siblings because you have a sense of like wanting to like care for them or whatnot. And then if you're like an only child or a younger sibling, you kind of want an older sibling because it's vice versa. I'm an eldest sibling, so I don't know if that's true or not. But that's interesting. But yeah, like the brother even talks about drawing, and that's something Ikateru does as well. So interesting. Then he sees like all of the different like text messages from Usahara where he's like, buy some ingredients for a hot pot while you're out. And he's like, what a jerk. And so then Kumatani did not mean to invite Usahara out to get, groceries with him, but Uramichi goes with him anyway. And he's like, what do you do to relax? And Uramichi's like, relax. And he's like, oh, never mind. Don't you get tired of being serious all the time? And he's like, I'm not really serious. And he's like, being serious doesn't mean just doing the things you're told, right? I definitely feel like in that moment, Kumatani is like, oh, this is what's going on. He's like, you were raised in a strict household too, and you probably were just lonely, and that's why you came to get groceries with me because you wanted somebody to go with. Like, I love that moment Kumatani kind of realizes it. And then we see the puppy. We see little baby Sayuri-chan. Oh my god. So cute. And there's a sister and Ikateru. And they're like, oh, thank you. Oh. And just stroke of fate that they met. They got Sayuri like 10 years ago. Oh, bless her heart. Oh. It's so cute. And they're like, okay. I think he was probably just feeling lonely by himself during winter break. Because then they continue that. He's like, I thought you were the serious type. And Uramichi is like, well, you submit reports, so I just don't want people to think I slack off. Isn't that just called being serious? It'll be lively when we get back. And then they see the two at the Kotatsu. Yep. But Uramichi looks so happy there. He looks so happy and like glad to see them all. So of course, Usahara is freaking out. Now, he sees Uramichi, right? He sees him and he's like, oh, good morning. And then he's like, yeah. And he's like, oh, you look really pale. And he's hungover. And he's like, oh, I do. And then Uramichi, he's like, well, I bet you had too much to drink, right? And he's like, oh, well. And he's like, here's some medicine for your stomach. And he's like, well, you're being kind for some reason. And he's like, oh, really? This is normal. He's like, did something good happen? And he's like, yeah, something like that. I found a good place. I'm like, what? He's like, it's the best place to be. And he's like, good luck with the shoot today. So, Is he actually quitting or not? And he says, "Are you happy like that?" And he says, "Yeah, I guess I am." Oh, I just can't imagine him quitting and leaving the two of them behind without saying a word. Like, I just can't imagine that. And of course, he says, "Well, Uramichi wants to quit his job." And it's like, what? What? I just. I find that all so hard to believe. I can't believe it just happened out of nowhere and we wouldn't know. There has to be some kind of bait and switch, some kind of switcheroo that's going to happen. How dare you, show? How dare you? No. Okay. I may have to take some time and catch up with the English dub, and maybe the English dub will give me some hints. Because it just can't be. Ah! Well. Not even fair. Not even fair. I am very curious to know your thoughts down below, but I can't believe next week is the final episode of the season. I've really, really come to love this series, and it's been such a fun jolt of joy. I would love to read the manga, but if I read the manga, I won't react to the anime. So it's like, choices, but I don't know. I'm not decided, so who knows? But I really, really, really have enjoyed this series so much. It's been such a little blip of sunshine, despite all of the existential crises. I've really enjoyed it, so I'm going to be really sad next week when I'm caught up. But what can we do? So, in any case, I'm really excited to hear your comments down below. I'm just going to freak out for this week because I probably won't get to watch this until next week to find out what the finale is. So we can all freak out together. And then I'll see y'all again real soon with the final episode of season 1 of Life Lessons with Uramichi Onisan. Bye. You're going to make us wait?